So I've recently been getting a lot of questions about commercial property investment versus residential property investment. People wondering which one is the right one to do, which is the better one to do, what are the drawbacks, what are the benefits, etc, etc. So what I thought is I'd do a very quick video with the top advantages of commercial property investment, the drawbacks of commercial property investment, and the same for residential as well. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to start with the benefits of commercial property investment. So number one, long, stable leases. What does that mean? Okay, so when you're buying a commercial property, you could, for example, buy a Halifax bank. You could buy the real estate that is tenanted by Halifax. Now what happens is your lease could be anywhere from a couple of years up to 15, 20 years at a set price, with set rental increases after every few years, 5 years, etc. Now what it means is that is going to give you a stable income from a blue chip tenant. Now that comes to a second point, strong tenants. Now obviously not all commercial properties are tenanted by blue chip tenants. You can get smaller, you could go for a local hairdresser, local dry cleaner, etc. But typically you can buy properties with big blue chip tenants. Now they do cost more because they're lower risk. You've got a blue chip tenant who's likely not going to default. But the point is that you could buy real estate with a blue chip tenant in there. Return's going to be lower than having a normal tenant, but you've got the security and stability. Because as we know, always risk and return work hand in hand. The higher the risk, the higher return. The lower the risk, the lower the return. Okay? Now we will come on to my next point. Low maintenance. So when you're buying a commercial property, maintenance is very little. It's the tenant's job to maintain the property, to upkeep the property. In a matter of fact, they have to give the property back to you in the same state that they found it as. So the same state you gave them to it, that's what they've got to give it to you back as. Okay? Less void periods. Now with a commercial property, because the leases are long, you've potentially got less void periods. You don't have somebody moving in every 6 months or a year, etc. You have one person, one tenant sat there in the long term, so you've got no headache, you know exactly what your rental return is, and that's what you're going to get. However, on the other side, should the lease expire, we'll come back to that on the drawback side, but when the lease expires, you could end up also with a longer void period. But traditionally, when you've got a set lease in place, they're going to stick to that, so you've got less void periods. Now let's move on to the drawbacks of commercial property investment. So the first drawback we'll come to is exactly what I mentioned first, is that if a tenant does move out, it can take longer to tenant it. So potentially longer void periods. Also, scarce availability of mortgage finance. As with residential properties, it's quite easy. You can get, most lenders will give you a residential mortgage or a buy-to-let mortgage. Unfortunately, with commercial properties, the lending is less available and the rates are also higher. So you've got to consider that when you're buying it. Capital growth. Now, realistically, your capital growth in a commercial property will be lower than a residential property. There's a few reasons for that. One of the key reasons is it is an income-based product. It's a yield-based product. So the value will increase, but in line with the rental more or less, and some marginal increase in line with the market, but nothing like residential property. And finally, what we have is sale and exit. Again, it's a limited niche product. Not everybody wants to buy a commercial property. So your typical high street agent can't really assist you with selling it. You have to look for an investor. No one's looking to buy it, to move into it. You don't have end users. You've realistically, the majority of your market is going to be investors who want to buy it as an investment product. So there's some of the drawbacks. There's some of the benefits of commercial property. Now let's move on to residential. So what are the benefits of residential property versus commercial? So the first benefit that I would say of residential property is flexibility. The property is so diverse, it can be used as a service accommodation if you wanted to. You can do long-term leases, you can do short-term leases, you can use it yourself should you want to. There's a variety of uses. You've got so much demand. That demand both reflects into rental of the property and sale of the property. When you're coming to selling it, you've got buyers who want to move into the property who may want to buy it. You've got buy to let who may want to buy it. You've got a whole variety, and people understand it better overall. Number 2, mortgages and finance. So when it comes to mortgage and finance, buy-to-let is an established market. There is dozens of lenders out there who will give you money for a buy-to-let property. And in matter of fact, they won't even certainly want to have a look at all of your income. They can base it on just on the property's rental income. So there's a plethora of finance available and at very, very attractive rates. Another benefit of residential property is capital growth. Now, the residential market is where capital growth is typically at its highest. Not always, but typically at its highest in most cases. Why is that? That is because there's more and more demand coming for people who are wanting to move into homes. There's always a supply issue. Demand is increasing, so you're going to have prices increase. Also, residential property markets have a lot of speculation. So let's say, for example, there's a new train line going in. Before the train lines even come in, and that's had its effect, people are talking about it, prices are increasing. All of that speculation, typically you can benefit from it more in the residential sector than the commercial sector. And the last benefit of residential property is an easy exit, which is very, very important when it comes to property. Everyone understands residential property. You can leave your home today, walk downstairs and go straight to a high street agent and put your property on for sale. And given the location, given the market conditions, he can reasonably sell it. So literally every man and his dog could help you sell your property. You can go online and find someone, and very easily you can find someone to get you out should you need to liquidate your asset. Now, the drawbacks of residential property. The first drawback is the new taxation laws. Anybody who's involved with property, you already know about this. So no longer can you deduct your interest payments from your tax liability. It's not brought in yet, but it's being phased in over the next few years. And what that will mean is that when you're declaring your tax return at the end of the year, you can't deduct the interest payments from your tax return and pay only on the remaining amount. You ultimately will start to have to pay tax on the entire amount, even though you've paid that out in interest. So HMRC will see the entire rental income from that property, less your maintenance expenses, as your revenue, even though you've paid a lot of that out in interest. Interest is no longer deductible as a cost, and that is having a big impact. Now, there's ways to get around that. There's different ways of structuring your portfolios. That's an entire different conversation about SPVs and corporate structures. We'll talk about that another time. But for now, for the traditional residential investor, if we do it how we've been doing it for years and years, that is a problem. Second drawback is void periods. In residential property, typically tenants, you have a high turnaround, high turnover of clients. So what happens is people may stay for 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years. Then you've got to put your property back on the market, get it relet again. Those months in the middle where you're looking for a tenant and your property is not tenanted, that's costing you money. In commercial property, typically you don't have those void periods because you've got one long lease. So the cost of letting it again, the cost that it's empty for that period of time, that's a drawback. Maintenance. The plumbing's gone wrong, the washing machine's not working, there's a pipe burst. They are all your headaches as the residential landlord, and they can wipe out all of your profits. So something goes wrong in the property, you've got to pay for it. Tenant contacts you, you've got to make sure you put things right. In a commercial property, you don't have to do that. The tenant is responsible for his own maintenance of the property. He will give you the property back in the condition that you gave it to him, and whatever happens in the interim period is his headache. If you're looking to make an investment in the UK in commercial or residential property, you can contact me, drop me a DM on my LinkedIn or any of my social media platforms. I'll connect you with a member of my team and they can show you and talk you through relevant opportunities both in the commercial sector and in the residential sector, and hopefully make yourself an investment that works for you and gives you a stable and long-term income.